Saturday mornings were always the same. You could count on the sun rising over Cedar Ridge, casting a soft, golden glow over my property as I packed the cooler with freshly caught trout, preparing to end the day with boots kicked off by the door. But that particular Saturday, it was different. Instead of relaxing by the back door, enjoying the simple satisfaction of a day's wake, I found myself standing in the kitchen, twisting the cold tap only to hear it sputter and gasp for life before going completely dry. The sound wasn't just empty. It echoed through the quiet of the house, a sharp reminder that something wasn't right. I turned off the tap, frustration settling in my chest. Water isn't just a luxury here. It's a heartbeat of everything. The rhythm that keeps my herd, the garden, and everything else running smoothly. Even the taste of my coffee, first thing in the morning, relied on it. My place sits on a 40-acre plot of land, nestled at a bend in the stream. The land where my fence lines meet the back of Cedar Ridge Meadows, an HOA community. They're the ones with the cookie-cutter houses, identical front porches, and cul-de-sacs that look like they came straight from a corporate design sheet. The folks in that neighborhood, they weigh when they are feeling generous and file complaints when they aren't. I've had this property long before the HOA even existed. The first time they tried to impose rules here was laughable. I built my own water system long before PVC pipes became standard, before people even knew what a backhoe was. It was hard work, but it's mine. So, when I realized every faucet in my house was bone dry, I knew something was wrong. I went through the house, checking everything as quietly as you would check on a sleeping child, trying not to alarm myself. My feet found their way instinctively down to the south fence where the water line runs. That's where I buried the main trunk years ago. I didn't need a bloodhound to sniff out the problem. The dirt was freshly disturbed, the kind of uneven mounds that happen when someone doesn't care about property lines. And there it was, my 4-inch PVC pipe cut clean through. The edge was sharp, like it had been sliced with precision. Someone had put enough duct tape over the cut to hold a bumper on a teenager's car, sealing it up. On the tape was a laminated sign, an authorized water use. Cedar Ridge Meadows Enforcement. Yellow ribbon was looped proudly around a metal stake. Tire tracks were visible, the wide tread pattern unmistakable. And there, unmistakably, were the prints of Lydia Crane. She's the HOA president, the one who treats every day like it's a beauty pageant where she gets to decide who wins and who loses. The first time I met her, she pulled into my driveway in her silver Lexus, rolled down her window, and informed me, like I was a child, that she would be formalizing the neighborhood's access to shared groundwater. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the most ridiculous thing I had ever heard. The springs that supply my property's water have always been mine. The pump house was built on my property, and the water rights were paid for long before the HOA even existed. Years ago, when they were first developing the neighborhood, I agreed to lease out a small part of my flow to the first 30 houses. It was a simple handshake agreement. They maintained their own pumps, and I charged them a nominal fee. But that lease expired over a decade ago, and it was never renewed. The records are all there, filed in the county office. It's all legal. The HOA, and Lydia in particular, clearly forgot, or conveniently ignored, the fact that their rights expired years ago. They didn't just mess with the pipes. They cut into something that had always been mine. I took pictures of the scene from every angle. These days, it's hard to prove anything without a timestamp. Then, I made my way to the barn, where the heart of the property lay. The old pump station hums with life, its metal panels worn and chipped from years of use, just like the rest of the place. It's been my father's legacy, and now, it's mine. I'd swear I'd fix it up one day, but for now, it does its job. The labels, scrawled in my father's handwriting, are still on the boards: irrigation pump, main pressure, and hidden behind a small flap I installed when I got tired of prying eyes: backup gate. At first, I didn't do anything drastic. Anger can make you do stupid things. I wasn't about to let my emotions dictate my next steps. Instead, I turned the secondary valve for the HOA's water line down to a trickle. Just enough pressure to make their system function, but not enough to satisfy their needs. By afternoon, sitting on the porch with a beer, I heard it, the distinct whining sound of their pump across the fence. It was struggling. I smiled into the bottle, letting the sun warm the moment. The next morning, the phone started buzzing, incessantly. Toby, a neighbor from a few doors down, had sent me screenshot from their private HOA chat. Complaints were flooding in, washers stalling mid-cycle, sprinklers barely spitting water, showers that were more like a mist. Lydia's first response was predictable: temporary fluctuation, standard maintenance. It was a usual, vague, community language. By noon, she was casting blame on external interference, clearly hinting at someone messing with their system. No names, just accusations. I didn't waste my time responding. When people throw around accusations like that, all they're really doing is trying to deflect. By 3 p.m., Lydia had rolled up in her Lexus again, parking it right by the hedge where her immaculate landscaping meets my patch of wild grass. She got out in her pristine white slacks, a blazer that looked too stiff for this kind of rural confrontation, and stood on the county side of the fence. With a smirk on her face, she called out to me with that familiar righteous tone. "Mason, we know you've done something to our water. Sabotage like this will not stand." I wasn't about to let her misstep go unchallenged. I walked over slowly, leaning on a post. "Sabotage is a strong word, Lydia. You're accusing me of something, but let me remind you of a little something. That line you cut, I laid it in 1993. Those springs feed my water. The permits are in my name. Your lease expired 10 years ago. So, whatever you think you're doing, you're not fixing anything. You're vandalizing my property." I gave her a moment to process, and when she tried to argue about the shared water system, I cut through her words with the truth. Their rights had expired a long time ago. For a decade, they had been using my water as a favor. When I finished, she looked at me like I had just read from a rule book she hadn't studied in years. But instead of admitting the mistake, she doubled down, calling my claim a bluff. "I'm not bluffing, Lydia," I said. "You can pull the county records. They are public. Look at the agreement, the maps, and come back when you're ready to admit you're in the wrong." She opened her mouth, but I didn't need to hear the next words. I was done listening. I turned on my heel and walked away, heading back to the barn, where the pressure valve awaited. The next day, as I sat back on the porch with my boots propped up, I could hear the distant hum of their water system trying to operate in vain. Their pumps sputtered and groaned under the strain. I turned the valve just enough to remind them that they were only getting a fraction of what they expected. It was satisfying, in a way. The kind of satisfaction you get when you know you've caught someone in the act, but you're patient enough to let them dig their own hole. The phone buzzed again. Toby had sent more screenshots, more complaints. Lydia and the HOA were scrambling. The community was starting to feel the effects of what they'd done. Their showers barely functioned. Washers were stopping mid-cycle. The sprinklers hardly spurted out a drop of water. The HOA's damage control had kicked into high gear. Lydia's latest response was typical of her style, vague and insistent. She spun it as temporary maintenance and tried to push the blame outward, external factors, something out of their control. A few hours later, she was hinting at interference, throwing out accusations of sabotage without naming names. I just smiled to myself. They were panicking, and it showed, but I knew better than to waste my time on them. I had my own plans. It wasn't about petty revenge, but about making sure they understood the rules. By the time the sun began to sink low in the sky, Lydia made her move. She had driven her Lexus down the same familiar path and parked it in front of the hedge that divided our properties. I watched her, dressed in that pristine blazer, still holding on to the illusion that a carefully curated life could intimidate me. She got out of the car and stood on her side of the property line, with an air of superiority. Then she called my name in that formal, "I'm the authority here" tone. "Mason," she began, "we know what you did to our water. Sabotage like this cannot go unanswered. We'll make sure this gets reported." I walked over slowly, giving her enough time to fidget with her thoughts. "You're right about one thing, Lydia," I said, leaning casually against the fence. "You've been sabotaging this entire neighborhood. You've been using my water without permission, and now you're trying to turn this into a community issue." Lydia didn't like hearing it put so bluntly. She insisted that they had a right to the water, that they had always shared it. But I wasn't about to let her twist the facts. "The lease expired a decade ago, Lydia. Your community hasn't had any legal right to access my water for years. You've been drinking from my well on borrowed time." She looked caught off guard for a moment, but then her words stumbled. She tried to play it off as a misunderstanding, but I wasn't buying it. "That's not how this works, Lydia. You're not going to twist the facts and walk away from this one. If you think your rights still stand, pull the public records. They are available to anyone, and the truth is they're in black and white." For a moment, she hesitated, searching for an excuse to dismiss what I'd just said. But I wasn't about to let her make the next move. I turned and walked back toward the barn, my feet crunching the gravel underfoot. I knew exactly what I was going to do next. It wasn't about hurting anyone. It wasn't even about the water. It was about setting the record straight. So I went to work. I adjusted the backup gate, the one that controlled the flow of water to the HOA's side. I made sure it wasn't shut off completely, but it wasn't going to work like they expected. They would get just enough to keep their systems running, but it wouldn't be enough to satisfy their demands. It was a warning, a clear message that this wasn't their game to win. As I sat back on the porch, enjoying the late afternoon sun, I could hear the faint whine of their pump across the fence. It was struggling, working harder than it should. I let the moment settle in, knowing that tomorrow would bring more complaints, more confusion, more scrambling. And by morning, I'd have my answer. The next day brought exactly what I expected. My phone buzzed with a flurry of messages from Toby. He had sent me screenshots of the HOA private chat. The neighbors were up in arms. Their washing machines were breaking down mid-cycle. Showers were just a trickle, and sprinklers barely managed to get the job done. Lydia and the board were working overtime to spin the situation, but their words had no weight anymore. Lydia had made her usual vague claims about the issue being temporary maintenance, but it was clear that their house of cards was starting to collapse. The more they tried to cover their tracks, the more they drew attention to their mistakes. I was waiting for the storm to come, and it didn't disappoint. Around noon, Lydia came charging back down the street, her Lexus glinting under the sun. She parked her car in front of the hedge again, the same spot as if nothing had changed. Her outfit was immaculate, as usual, but her expression was tight, urgent. She stepped out, heels clicking on the pavement, and with all the confidence of a sheriff in an old western, she called my name. "Mason," she shouted, "we know what you've done. You've sabotaged our water supply, and you'll pay for this. This kind of behavior won't stand in our community." I didn't move immediately. Instead, I took my time, walking over casually and leaning against a nearby post. I could see the desperation in her eyes. She was cornered. "Lydia," I said, my voice steady, "I'm not the one who's sabotaging anything. You're the one who's been using water you don't have any right to. You cut my pipe. You violated our agreement." She tried to deny it, of course, insisting that it was all a misunderstanding. But her words were hollow. "That pipe you cut," I asked, letting the silence stretch. "That's my pipe. I laid it in 1993. Those springs are mine. The permits are in my name. You haven't had any right to that water for a long time, and you know it." She stood there, speechless for a moment, processing what I had just said. The truth hit her hard. But instead of owning up to the mistake, she tried to shift the blame. "You're bluffing," she said, her voice shaky. "You're just trying to cover your own tracks." I didn't flinch. "Go pull the public records. Lydia, they are there for anyone to see. Look at the maps, the leases. You'll see I'm telling the truth." Her face turned a shade of red I hadn't seen before. She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't wait around for more excuses. I turned on my heel, walking away without saying another word. I had already said what needed to be said. The next step was simple. Make sure they never forgot this lesson. The fine came the next day. A neatly printed letter, adorned with the HOA logo in the corner. They'd slapped a $10,000 fine on me for unauthorized access and system tampering. I couldn't help but laugh. Not because I was happy about it, but because the audacity of these people was beyond belief. They cut my pipe, and then they turned around and tried to charge me for it. I kept the letter and set it beside the expired lease. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I wasn't going to let it go. I wasn't going to be intimidated or pushed around. I wrote my own letter, a simple one, explaining everything clearly. I attached copies of the records, the agreements, the dates. I made sure everything was laid out in black and white, no ambiguity. The message was simple. I would restore their water immediately, but only under one condition. Lydia Crane had to step down. I walked through the neighborhood that night, slipping letters into every mailbox. By morning, the HOA chat was buzzing again. People were starting to see the truth. The pressure was mounting. Lydia tried to spin her usual narrative, but it wasn't working anymore. People were starting to wake up. That afternoon, a quiet shift happened. One by one, people began to come to me, asking about the agreement. Paul Benton, a retired judge and a quiet man at the end of Birchloop, called me first. He confirmed everything I'd said and offered to be the first to sign the new agreement. Others followed. They were tired of Lydia's control, tired of the constant rules that made no sense. When the emergency meeting was called at the clubhouse, Lydia stood there, trying to defend her actions. But it was too late. Paul Benton stood up and confirmed what everyone had known deep down. Lydia had no legal standing. The lease had expired. She had trespassed and vandalized my property. After the meeting, Lydia's reign was over. The next morning, the moving truck arrived. The place that had once been Hayes was now just another vacant house in a neighborhood she'd never understand. Cedar Ridge Meadows moved on. The HOA elections were fair. The rules were rewritten. People started asking questions. No more mailbox color complaints. No more policing kids' chalk drawings. For once, things were normal. And as for me, I took down the temporary no trespassing signs and replaced them with something simpler, something more honest. A slab of oak with a clear message: private land, private water, mutual respect required. With the last chapter finished, the story now concludes with a sense of resolution. The protagonist stands his ground, ensures justice, and earns the respect of his neighbors. Let me know if you'd like any changes or if you'd like me to work on another project.